I want to tell you that I think rabbis this High Holy Days had a dilemma that was unique. And we went in different directions based on the dilemma. Some said we have to talk about what's going on around the world, words like ISIS or ISIL, and all that's happening that terrifies us, frankly. And some, like me, decided that that won't be what we'll share in the synagogue, but instead what I decided, rather than be neglectful of that, you'll get later today probably a digital sermon, something that you can read privately, so that if you choose to share an element of it with your family, it's your choice. It's not my imposition on you. But what I'd ask you to do is to find that email at some point. It's not just saying that services start at 10 or 10:15. It's asking you to think and consider what's going on in the world, particularly uniquely at this Rosh Hashanah. What I'd like to talk to you about is something a little more uplifting. It's happiness. I don't know if you read Arthur Brooks's article this summer in the New York Times, but I want to read something to you from it that I thought was powerful and apropos of this holy day and this new start to the year. His article was called "Love People, Not Pleasure." He opens with a story about Abed Al Rahman III, probably a name that none of us know unless you're an avid history buff. He was an emir and a caliph of Cordoba in Spain in the 10th century. He was an absolute ruler who lived in complete luxury. Here's how he assessed his own life. These are his words. He wrote, "I have now reigned above 50 years in victory and peace, beloved by my subjects, dreaded by my enemies and respected by my allies. Riches and honors, power and pleasure have waited on my call. No earthly blessings appear to have been wanting to my happiness." Sounds pretty good. Fame, riches, power, pleasure beyond imagination. He goes on to write, "I have diligently numbered the days of pure and genuine happiness which have fallen my lot. They amount to 14. If I heard a wow, it was because somebody did the math. More than 50 years of everything a man or woman could want in this world, or so we're told. And yet when he honestly assesses his worth and his life and his experience of that intangible happiness that we're so committed to, he counts 14 days, not years, not months, not decades, but 14 days. And I could either talk to you about clinical depression, because maybe that's what this story is about, but I don't have the qualification to talk to you about that. Or I could talk to you as a rabbi about happiness, which is something that becomes a religious challenge, something relevant to us, something relevant to our kids and our grandkids and our family and our friends, because all of us struggle with this intangible, this invisible. Like God, happiness is something that we want to believe is real, and yet sometimes we touch it, and then it disappears. Like in prayer, sometimes we're God felt and holy in those moments, and sometimes we just pray. The same is true of happiness. The question might be then, why is happiness worthy of so much shelf space on the imaginary shelves of Amazon and the real shelves of Barnes & Noble? The social commentator Eric Hoffer wrote that the pursuit of happiness is one of the chief causes of unhappiness. And I think he was onto something. I think that he was recognizing the reality that happiness is really just too damn elusive to be worthy of all that pursuit. That happiness is ephemeral, that it's fleeting, that the overarching pursuit of it must yield on the happiness. It's like my brother and I, when we go fishing, and we don't catch anything after hours and hours and hours of fishing, and my brother says to me, "That's why it's called fishing, not catching." Our society markets an idea to us. Every ad makes a connection not only between us and a product, but it makes a connection between us and a product and happiness. Think about that. Every time you see an advertisement, that woman slow motion running across the field because she has something in her life, the message is somehow that brought her that fleeting, that beauty, that happiness, that lightness so that she could float in slow motion while all of us tread heavily on the ground. Think about products and cars and dresses and rings and all the advertisement and their allure, their own glamour, their own glint says to us, if you have me, you will be happy. If you wear this Gucci dress, you will be happier than if you don't. If you drive that white Porsche, it will give something to you other than just transportation. And what will it be? Happiness. So our kids are growing up in a world in which, rightly and wrongly, they're taught that products matter. That society looks to products to give us something of value and of worth. But unfortunately, the connection that they make and that we make often is that we connect it to self-worth. Not just worth, $50,000 or 12, but to self-worth. That somehow that means I am worth more. That somehow if I am worth more, the ergo, the expression is, the implication is that I will be happier. But I live in my house and I live in yours so often. I walk through doorways and I realize no matter how grand and adorned those houses are, happiness is fleeting. No matter what the zip code, what it begins or ends with, all of us struggle to be happy. What about as parents? Think about what it is when we tell our kids the importance of happiness. What does it mean to us as parents? What is it that we're trying to protect them from? What is it that we're trying to say to ourselves so that we can say to ourselves, I gave my children a happy childhood? Do we really have the temerity to think we have that power? I look to the teens and the kids in this sanctuary, and I think about them, and I think about the ones that have the greatest struggles, and I actually believe they might be the happiest of all of them, because they're learning at this age in life that life is painful and challenging and extraordinarily beautiful. That they're learning through their struggles and even through tears, the joy and a smile is something exquisite that will happen, and then it'll go again. That sometimes they'll hold on to those moments of realizing that the sun is shining, that it isn't clouds above their head, but sunshine. And other times they'll walk as the psalmist did through a valley of shadows. But that's also life's journey. And what if we taught them with humility? What if we said to our kids and our grandkids, sweetheart, I want to tell you what that Torah has taught me. And I want to tell you what Jewish history has taught me. And I want to tell you what my study of world history and of our family's history and of my own personal history has taught me. Life is challenging. It's even painful. So do something of worth and different quality than happiness. It's called contentment. It's called realizing you did something of value that day that somehow makes your heart swell. It's called touching, not isolating. It's called realizing that beyond the dresses and the clothes and the cars that separate us, there are people who can connect us to who we might be and become. That happiness might be found at any price or none in a synagogue on a day like today. Because we'll realize something precious about life. Because when we hear that shofar blow, it'll say to us in its cry, in its anguish, in its imperfection, that it's just like us. Remember shvarim, the broken chords that are like a wail, a pant, somebody who can barely breathe because they're crying? And then truah, which is like another form of cry. But what comes after it? Tekiah, which is strength, which is gratitude, which is the splendor of realizing that we made it through the wails and the pains and the fears and the challenges of those broken cries to realize our wholeness in our brokenness. I worry that we place too much value on happiness, that we shield our children from the vicissitudes of life, that we hope that we'll keep them happy, and yet that what we're actually doing is not preparing them for real life, which is challenging. Goodness might be a different ending to that sentence that we know begins with life, liberty, and a pursuit. So maybe as a nation, we should pursue life, liberty, and happiness. But as individuals and families and congregants, we should pursue life, liberty. And as my colleague Jennifer Nye said when we discussed this once, what about life, liberty, and the pursuit of goodness? Isn't that what we should attune ourselves to this year? Forget happiness. It'll come and go. It's like clouds that pass and go, that change the shade, the dapper, the look of our lives. But goodness is what sustains our worth in the world. But what does it mean to be good? When we drop our child off at a curb and we say, be good, it means nothing unless we've taught them goodness. If for 12 years that child never understood through our example of our lives what goodness is, then when we say, be good, we're asking them to do something beyond their ability. We shouldn't have that expectation of them or of ourselves. So how do we school ourselves in goodness places, to school ourselves in goodness? Because what we learn here in living tradition is that goodness is what happens in lines at Baja Fresh and at Ralph's and Chevron and on the 101 merging to the 405. That's goodness. That's when we're tested. And goodness is what happens when you go outside and realize that somebody parked right where you wanted to park. That's where you expand the generosity of your soul. Goodness happens in conflict, in those ugly moments that cause us to stiffen or to expand. Goodness is what happens when we see our parents doing something, and through that example, we realize how we can talk to a person. Goodness is what happens when we choose generosity, expansiveness over shrinking, over selfishness. Goodness is what happens when we realize that we have the ability and the obligation to use our teeth to guard our tongue, to protect others from what we might think rather than say. All of us go into this year with a capacity to say words that will either bring joy and light to the world or darken it. And I would say that every one of us agrees on this Rosh Hashanah 5775, the world is dark enough. It needs our light. What Isaiah said to be Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations, he didn't even know how much we'd need it. The prophet Isaiah, what did he know about light in those days? He didn't realize the world you would live in this moment and that I would live in. He didn't realize the challenges of adding light and realizing that even a small match can bring light to a darkened room. That if one of you held a lamp up, a small lamp, one match, one flame, and we turned all the lights off, there would be light in this room. We could see it. That's you and me and the world. It's one candle. It's one flame. It's one wick. And every day, like in the story that I told you last night of the man who runs from Athens to Thebes to Corinth with that candle, with that Olympic torch, only realizing that he's running so hard and so fast that it blew out miles ago. This holy day says, light it and cherish it and cup it and caress it and realize that that light emanates from within you. That's God's gift. God didn't give you just a shell. He gave you a vessel for light. There was an interesting book that I read this summer. And the book is fascinating. You might want to pick up a book called On Purpose. It's by a doctor, and I love his name. It's called Dr. Stretcher, Victor Stretcher. And if I tell you that he is a doctor of longevity, then you realize Stretcher is actually a fantastic name. On Purpose teaches us that the key to a good life and even to a mentally and physically healthy life, is having a mission, a personal purpose. Researchers, Dr. Stretcher tells us, find that people who have a weak purpose, or none at all, are 2.4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than the people who have a strong purpose in life. Do you want to hear that again? Researchers, Dr. Stretcher tells us, find that people who have a weak purpose in life, or none at all, are 2.4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than the people who have a strong purpose in life. People who have a strong purpose are shown to live longer, be less likely to have heart attacks, and less incidence of stroke. So I want to ask you to just stop for a moment. I'll be quiet. Just mull over those ideas and ask yourself, if you live just with a plan or if you live with a purpose. The challenge of sermons is we often nod listening to a sermon. We go, he needs to hear this. She needs to hear this. But we don't look over and realize that they're looking at us at the same time. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it incredible to think that what this science, what this research is telling us is that our physical organs and systems, our brain, is tied to the decisions and the feelings of our lives. You see, here's where science and religion come together. Dr. Stretcher says that humans need a personal mission, and he adds that it has to be transcendent. Now think about your life. That means it needs to be bigger than us. It can't be an egocentric mission of material gain, power, prestige, promotion, more money in the bank or in the 401k. It can't be that Porsche or that dress or that ring. They can't be our purpose. They can be a pursuit, but they're not transcendent. So what is such a transcendent message or mission? Look in the Torah. That scroll screams of transcendent messages and missions. The ancient book speaks of a people who are striving for freedom. Listen to the verbs. They are struggling in the wilderness. They're striving for a promised land. They're not looking for real estate in the desert. They're striving for something that will end slavery and bring them to liberty that they share even to this day. Their striving for themselves is what we inherited. That land, Israel, this peace in this world, this place that we live in with its values are a result of their striving. So think about what it meant in those days and now to live a transcendent life. Moses, we know, lived to 120 years old, the Torah says, and I said early in the service that numbers may not matter, but think about this in terms of symbols and longevity. I think Dr. Stretcher would say that Moses was the archetypal example of a man on a mission who achieved great reward and longevity. Let my people go, there's a mission. Live according to God's laws so that you may long live on the land that Adonai has given you. That's a transcendent message. And it's a connection again between how we live, our purpose, and our longevity. You might say our health, our wherewithal. You only need to look in the Torah to know that these pursuits weren't easy. They were exhausting. They were at times exasperating. If you listen to the way that we prayed this Rosh Hashanah, we prayed in a way that is transcendent of us. There wasn't a prayer in the Hebrew that we said or you said that began with I, Anochi or Ani in Hebrew. It was us. It was we. We don't pray as Jews for our individual salvation. That's not ours. We pray for the world's redemption. That's a transcendent religion, a transcendent message. What do you think transcendent means on a personal basis? Volunteering. It means having a job, starting a job, or having a job, or a business that serves a greater good than just earning us money. The value of doing good for others is transcendent. A high school administrator who retires only to begin a new phase in her life at that point in retirement, supporting her daughter, raising her grandson. That's a transcendent message, a transcendent life, a transcendent purpose. It's challenging, it's exhausting, but my God, it's meaningful and it's purpose-filled. Dr. Stretcher writes about retirement, a little quote you might want to hear. He says, retirement is a time of urgent repurposing. Aging isn't a purpose, it's merely a condition. Remember I spoke in the beginning about a foreign man in the 10th century, Abed Al Rahman III, whom none of us have met. I don't know that we've even met his kids. But what we got on this Rosh Hashanah was an opportunity to meet our stories with his. to think about what he had in relation to what we yearn for and strive in this year ahead. Maybe what would have changed his number from 14 to 15 or 50 or a year or more years is if he'd had what we have, these holy days. If he'd had a tradition of holiness that was transcendent. If he'd had a tradition of goodness that wasn't aiming toward happiness, but was aiming toward goodness. I hope that in this Rosh Hashanah, as we journey through not a day of awe, but days of awe, that we come into a year of awe, a year that is awe-filled and awe-inspiring and awesome, so that our grandchildren and our nieces and nephews and our children and those people who meet us in Ralph's and at Chevron and where we merge with the 101 and the 405 will realize through example what the tiniest fragments of goodness look like in the world. Shana Tova. On the back of your seat,